Next, let's stop picking on this sphere and check out a grid. Hit tab to go into edit mode, and what I want to do here is just mess up these vertices a whole lot. I'll turn on proportional editing up in the header, select an edge, face, or vertex, and I'm going to really just mangle this mesh a little bit. All right, once you've got it nice and messy, what we're going to do is select all of the vertices inside the boundary here, and then to magically fix this garbled mess, we can go to Vertex and choose Smooth Vertices. Then as we increase the smoothing, it gets a little better. You can also repeat this a whole bunch of times in the same operation, and so if we drag this all the way up to like 50, it'll completely fix our grid. This is incredibly helpful because sometimes you're working with, let's say, a big n-gon, and you're using your knife tool, and you're making some faces. You don't necessarily always want to be super exact about where you're placing these, and sometimes you just end up with something that's a little bit messy. So let's say you have that, and you want to make it look a little prettier. Well, what you can do is just select that whole area, again, go to Vertex and Smooth Vertices, and there you go. You probably don't want this to be all the way at 54 or something ridiculous. That's just turned way up because that example was super extreme. But most of the time I use 2 or 3 and change the smoothing factor until I have something that I like. So that tool allows us to work a little bit messy and clean it up at the end. The next tool that I want to show you is Mirror. And so for that, I'll add a Suzanne because she has a pretty distinct front, back, top, and bottom. And if I go into edit mode, I can just mirror her around by going to Mesh, Mirror, and choosing any of the global axes or the local axes. Or I can use the interactive mirror with Control M and choose either the X, Y, or Z axes. So this is pretty intuitive. All you need to do is just, no matter how your mesh is rotated, you can always just flip it by hitting Control M and choosing whatever axis you want to mirror on. One thing to know about this though is that it does flip around the normals. So if we go to our overlays and turn on face orientation, you can see that our Suzanne is entirely blue, but if I hit Control M and X, then hit enter, all of our faces are now red. The reason for this is that mirroring is actually under the hood just doing a scale by -1 along that axis. See, if I hit S and then X to scale along the X axis, I can make it go completely flat when it's exactly at 0, but then if I keep going in the negative direction, it'll flip the object and also flip the normals. So it's kind of like I'm turning my object inside out. Now, I wish Blender's mirror command was smart enough to know that we probably want to correct the normals after the fact, but it doesn't do that for us. So if we do mirror something with Control M and choosing an axis, then what you probably want to do directly after is use the hotkey Shift N to recalculate your normals. Or you can also go to Mesh, Normals, and recalculate outside. So it's a pretty easy tool to use, but it comes with that caveat, and flip normals can cause a lot of confusion. So I definitely recommend just getting into the habit of doing that automatically after you mirror something. Now, related to mirroring is symmetrize. I think I've mentioned before that I don't use Blender's edit mode mirror a whole lot. Let me just start with the fresh monkey that is exactly symmetrical. And I'll also turn off my overlays here for face orientation. If I select one side of Suzanne here and turn on my edit mode mirror under options and mirror, or just use the icon in the top right, I can grab her ear and move it around, and everything works like you would expect. My rotation, my scale, everything looks great. But like I mentioned in the Blender basics, this doesn't take into account adding or removing geometry. So if I were to just fully delete some faces here, that's not mirrored. Or if I extrude some faces or duplicate, none of this stuff is being mirrored onto the other side, which I think is really unfortunate and makes the edit mode mirror a little bit broken in my opinion in Blender. Luckily, we have the mirror modifier, which is super easy to use, and I usually just am using that anyway. But let's say that you're working on a model that you want to be partially mirrored. In this example, I'll just take Suzanne's eye here, Control L, and this one I'll scale down on one side. Of course, I'll turn off mirroring there. So now she has one tiny eye and one big one. Well, the tool that helps us out here is Symmetrize. If I were to select everything and then go to Mesh and Symmetrize, then it'll take everything that's on one side of the axis and copy that over to the other side. In this case, it's going from the negative direction to the positive direction. So it just replaced the small eye with the big one. But if I hit Control Z and undo that. Again, go to Mesh and Symmetrize. I could also switch that to -x to x, and now she has two small eyes. What's nice about this, though, is that I could also leave this as one big eye, one small eye, and make some details. Again, things that couldn't be copied over with the regular edit mode mirror. Then I can select this whole part of the mesh and not select the eyes, and then go to Mesh and Symmetrize. And now I've flipped just that section without affecting the eyes at all. So this can be a pretty powerful way to work, and something that I'd also recommend setting a hotkey to if you think you're going to be using this often. So since Control M is the hotkey for mirroring, and I think of Symmetrize like a type of mirror, I might want to use the hotkey Shift M, because that's something that's not being used by anything else at the moment. So I'll right click and assign shortcut, Shift M, and again, I'm not going to be using this hotkey in the rest of the course because it's not default, but just to show you how fast it can be, I can go through and I can make some tweaks. E to extrude, I'll do whatever inset. This is all just kind of garbage example stuff anyway, but I can do whatever I need to here. Control L to select the entire connected mesh, Shift M, and I'm done. So while though the edit mode mirror isn't that great, Symmetrize is actually super cool. There is one caveat with this tool though, just like there is with mirror, and that's that it can leave you with double vertices. In this case, I don't see any, but we can also double check by selecting everything and hitting M and by distance. And it looks like it removed one vertex, so that was hiding in there somewhere. But Symmetrize can create double vertices if you only work on a portion of the mesh. So if I take, let's say these faces here, E to extrude, and then I hit Control plus a couple times to select only what's around there, and then I use that Symmetrize command, then you can see that it was a little overzealous on what faces to create. And so now we have some faces lying directly on top of other faces. So what I recommend is usually just selecting the entire connected mesh and then doing Symmetrize, because then that shouldn't leave you with any extra vertices. But if you're only working on a portion of the mesh and then you use Symmetrize, then sometimes it can leave you with doubles. So if that happens, just select everything, M, and merge by distance. And you can see that removed 50 vertices, so that can definitely be a problem sometimes. But if you're working on only a portion of the mesh, just be super careful about that. And if you remove your doubles, then you should be fine. Though you can also double check for interior faces, again, because it's just copying over one side of the mesh from the other, and it's not necessarily deleting this section first. So you might have some of these interior faces, which are also really not good. So it can leave you with a little bit of a mess. So this is another thing that I wish was improved in Blender, but it's not too difficult to work around. The next tool that I want to show you is best demonstrated on a cylinder. So I'll go ahead and delete my reindeer monkey there. Shift A and add a cylinder. Hit Tab to go into edit mode. And here I'm just going to add a couple edge loops around the center. Now let's say I wanted to take this center edge loop and tilt it a bit. Well, you might think I could select it and then hit R to rotate, and that does work, but you'll notice how it bends the cylinder. The reason for this is as we rotate, it's keeping it as a perfect circle, and in order to keep that perfect shape, it has to distort the cylinder. Well, there's another command that's like a rotation, but constrained, and it's called shear. You can get to this one in the mesh menu under transform, or you could use the hotkey Control Alt Shift S, which is a lot of finger gymnastics, and I don't tend to use this one because it's view dependent. So if you go Control Alt Shift S, it doesn't appear like it's doing anything sometimes, and you have to change the axis manually, and it's just kind of a hassle. So luckily, there's also a toolbar version of it. If you go to your toolbar, you can find the shear tool, and this one's super easy. You just pick one of these axes and drag, and it shears it in the direction that you drag. So I use this all the time when making things like pipes, where I want to have some detail that's running along it. For example, now, if I shear both of these, then I can go to Face Select mode, select the loop that goes all the way around, hit Alt-E to bring up my Extrude menu, and choose Extrude Faces along normals. And with that, I was able to really easily cut an interesting diagonal shape into this cylinder. And if you were to try to do that by rotation or edge sliding, it would take absolutely forever. So if you want to rotate something, but you want to keep it also aligned to an axis, then think of the shear tool. Next to that, we also have the Shrink Fatten tool, which if we select a whole set of face loops going around, we can push or pull these faces along their normal. Also very similar to that, is an actual push-pull, which is directly along the normal. I don't want to get too in the weeds on this one, but do know that it's really helpful to select some vertices, and the hotkey for this one is Alt-S, so I can just hit Alt-S and scale these vertices along their normal, and instead of making an inset, I've now pushed these outwards. And with that, we've covered all the tools that I would consider essential for modeling. You don't have to memorize them all right away, since whenever they come up in the course, I'll mention again how to use them, but I do want you to give them all a try. Now, as a bonus, there's some other tools that I think are really cool and helpful that I use all the time that we're not going to use in this course, but I still think that you should see. And the first of those is actually an add-on. So if you go to Edit and Preferences, unfortunately, it's not one of the add-ons that's built into Blender, but if you go to Get Extensions and you type in Loop Tools, you can see I already have it installed, but if you don't, it'll be under Available, and it's completely free. It just downloads it from the Blender Extensions website. Go ahead and click Install, and then you'll be able to use it. And once Loop Tools is enabled, you can right-click in Edit mode and get a whole bunch of extra tools here in the right-click context menu. The ones that I use the most often are Circle and Space. So Circle just takes any selection of vertices and turns it into a circle. So here I have a bit of an oval. I can just right-click, Loop Tools, and Circle, and it'll make that into a perfect circle. So no matter what the selection is, I can always turn that into a perfect circle, and that can be extremely helpful. So if you want to, even in vertex select mode, control right-click, draw any shape that you want, even if it's super sloppy, you can always turn that into a perfect circle. And in the redo panel, you have a ton of options, including how it's rotated. This one is helpful not only for circles themselves, but also for turning rectangles into perfect squares. So if I just make some sort of rectangle here, I'll hit F to make that a face. I can turn this into a perfect square by right-clicking and choosing Circle. We can even use that to make a perfect triangle. If I select 3 of those, hit F to make a face, right-click and choose Circle, then it'll just evenly distribute those points around the circle, giving us a perfectly equilateral triangle. The other option that I really like in Loop Tools is Space. And this one's pretty sweet because it just evenly spaces out our selected vertices. So if I were to go to Vertex Select mode and slide these around a bunch, and let's just say I created them kind of messily, they're not evenly spaced at all. If I wanted to make these evenly spaced, I could just select one, Control, select another one. Oh, it looks like the shortest path went right through the middle. So I'll select one, Control, go halfway in between, and I'll do that again. So now I have this whole section selected, right-click, Loop Tools, and Space. It'll perfectly space those apart. It'll also interpolate it to keep the curvature that we had going. So this is an incredibly useful option for evenly spacing things apart. Now, lastly, and I know we've talked about a lot of tools so far, I just want to show you one more bonus one, and that's that if we have a plane, and let's say I break this quad, which means that I distort it in such a way that it can't be a perfect plane, it has to be split into triangles like this. If I'm not happy with the way that Blender split this into triangles, then I can just select this entire face, go to Face, Face Data, and choose Flip Quad Tessellation, so that'll triangulate it in the opposite way. The reason this is so helpful is because Blender computes the triangulation right when the vertices are created, and so it doesn't want to recalculate that all the time because that can be extremely expensive. And if you make a change and you decide, oh, that's not the way that I'd like that to be triangulated, well, you can just select that face, go to Face, Face Data, and choose Flip Quad Tessellation, and that might look a little bit better. Of course, broken quads are never a great idea, but sometimes it's really helpful to be able to more manually define how they're being triangulated under the hood. So those last few tools were just things that I find useful that I wanted to show you because I do use them all the time, but we're not going to be using them in this course. So if that seemed like a little bit much, then definitely don't worry about it. But before you move on to the next lesson, I do want you to practice using fill and connect and grid fill, dissolve, rip, smooth vertices, mirror, and symmetrize. Once you're familiar with those tools and all of the tools that we talked about in the Blender basics, then congrats. You know every single tool that we're going to be using in this course and all of the tools that you need to become a very proficient modeler. Now, even if you're not sure how to put them all together yet to practical use, that's okay because that's what the entire rest of the course is about. So just give these tools a go, and I'll see you in the next lesson.